Lily stood outside the exclusive gala, the night air heavy with the scent of expensive perfume and the distant hum of luxury cars pulling up to the entrance. Her heels clicked sharply on the cobblestones as she walked in, her heart pounding in a rhythm that didn't match the calm confidence she tried so hard to exude. This was everything she had dreamed of: diamond necklaces, flowing gowns, and champagne toasts, with men who spoke in hushed tones about high-end investments and billion-dollar deals. Marco, her new boyfriend, stood beside her, his arm possessively around her waist as they approached the velvet ropes. His presence always made her feel like she belonged here, like she was part of a world she had once only seen in glossy magazines. But as the cameras flashed and the crowd's murmurs grew louder, Lily felt a strange twinge in her chest. Something about this world, so lavish and perfect, felt hollow. She couldn't shake the nagging thought that it wasn't the life she had once imagined for herself. Just a year ago, she was with Alex, a man who had nothing in terms of wealth, but everything in terms of love. They had shared simple moments, cooking dinner in a cramped apartment, laughing over a cheap bottle of wine, dreaming about a future they were willing to build together. But somewhere along the way, Lily had started to crave more. More money, more status, more excitement, and Marco had given her that. Or so she thought. Lily's mind wandered back to the moment she had made the decision to leave Alex behind. He had loved her with everything he had, but she couldn't ignore the stark difference between his world and Marco's. Marco's world was bright, glittering, a future promised to her on a silver platter. Alex was just a man with a kind heart, a heart that could never buy her the designer dresses or the trips to Paris she now took for granted. And when Marco swept her off her feet, giving her the life she always imagined, Lily told herself she had made the right choice. It was all about ambition, she justified, all about finding her place in the world. But tonight, as she stood there in Marco's shadow, the weight of it all started to feel suffocating. The woman next to her, a fellow guest at the gala, casually tossed her hair and flashed her diamond-studded wrist, boasting about her recent vacation to Bora Bora. The men around them laughed and traded inside jokes about their latest business deals. And there she was, standing at the center of it all, but still feeling like an outsider. Was this really the life she wanted? Marco, despite his charm and success, was showing signs of arrogance, his sharp remarks cutting deeper with each passing hour. She had seen it before, on the rare occasions when the real Marco slipped out from beneath the facade. His impatience with her simple questions, his dismissive tone when she asked about the past. But she had ignored it, focusing instead on what she thought was the perfect future. Suddenly, Marco grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the center of the room. "Don't just stand there looking bored, Lily. Smile. You're with me now," he snapped, his voice harsh. She looked up, startled by the coldness in his tone. He had been so charming, so tender when they first met. But tonight, something was different. His grip tightened on her arm, and for the first time, Lily felt a jolt of fear. This wasn't the man she had fallen for. This wasn't the man who had promised her the world. This was someone else, someone she hadn't noticed before, and someone she wasn't sure she could trust. Her phone buzzed in her purse, a distraction she eagerly welcomed. She quickly pulled it out and glanced at the screen, hoping for a moment of comfort. It was a text from Alex. "I'm doing just fine." The words hit her harder than she expected. A flood of emotions rushed over her, the guilt, the longing, the pain. She hadn't heard from him in months. Her heart skipped a beat. Why had she let him go? Why had she traded him for all this? "Lily, focus," Marco hissed, shaking her from her reverie. "Do I have to do everything for you?" Lily's chest tightened as she looked up at Marco, the man she had chosen. In that moment, the room around her seemed to blur, the opulence, the noise, the laughter, fading into the background. She felt as though she was drowning in a world she didn't belong to, suffocated by the very life she had once thought was her dream. But what happened next would change everything. The evening wore on, and the glittering world around Lily seemed to twist and warp, no longer the shining fantasy she had once imagined it to be. Marco's behavior grew more erratic as the night progressed, his temper flaring when he didn't get the attention he believed he deserved. Lily's mind drifted back to the days with Alex, the simplicity of their life that now felt like a distant memory. She remembered his warm smile when they'd first met, his gentle humor that always made her laugh, and how he promised her they would make it, no matter what. He had believed in her, in them, and she had believed in that love. But now, standing amidst the excess of champagne-filled glasses and loud laughter, she couldn't help but feel that something crucial had been lost. Was it ambition that had driven her away from Alex, or was it something deeper? Something that made her feel like she was somehow destined for more than the life she had with him. Marco, on the other hand, seemed to be growing increasingly impatient with her. He would make cutting remarks under his breath when they were around others, his voice dripping with disdain whenever Lily didn't meet his expectations. "I don't know why I bother," he muttered at one point, his hand firmly gripping her wrist as he pulled her closer. "It's like you don't even care about where we're going." The words stung. She was still struggling to keep up with his whirlwind of wealth and status, but what bothered her more was how much his mood swings mirrored those of her past relationships. Control, pressure, and the fear of being abandoned. Lily excused herself, needing a moment to collect her thoughts. She slipped away from Marco, stepping into the balcony where the cool night air hit her face like a slap. She leaned over the railing, her mind racing, as she tried to make sense of everything. She had traded simplicity for glamour, comfort for a false sense of security. And now, in this very moment, she was unsure of what to do next. Her phone buzzed again, and this time, it was a reminder. The message was from Alex's mother, a simple, "Hope you're doing well, Lily. Alex misses you." The words punched her in the gut. She could almost hear Alex's voice in her head, gentle and sincere, telling her he was still holding out hope for their future, despite everything. The life they could have had, the dreams they once shared, it all came rushing back. Lily's chest tightened as tears welled in her eyes. She had hurt him. She had abandoned him for this life that felt like a prison of luxury. Marco's world had promised so much, but now that she had it, it felt empty. Was all of this worth it? A sudden voice broke through her thoughts. "I thought I told you to stick close to me." It was Marco, his eyes narrowing as he approached. His tone was sharp, like a knife cutting through the fragile moment of clarity Lily had found on the balcony. She straightened up, wiping her eyes quickly before he could see the tears. She had to play the part. Perfect, composed, the woman who had everything. But in that instant, she realized something she hadn't wanted to admit. Marco wasn't the man she had thought he was. He was demanding, manipulative, and had slowly started to show the same signs of insecurity and control that Alex never had. She had traded one prison for another. Marco stepped closer, his voice dripping with arrogance. "What's the matter, Lily? You think you're too good for all of this now? Too good for me?" The words hit her like a slap. There it was. The ugliness she hadn't seen before, the side of him that was always lurking, ready to surface. It was no longer about love or connection. It was about ownership, control, and pride. This wasn't a partnership. It was a transaction. A part of her wanted to snap back, to tell him exactly what she was feeling, but she stopped herself. The world they lived in was too fragile, too dependent on appearances. She couldn't afford to break the facade, not in front of everyone. But deep inside, something began to shift. Marco wasn't the prince she had imagined him to be. He was a man who had only offered her the illusion of security. Her heart ached as the weight of her mistakes settled in her chest. How had she not seen this before? How had she allowed herself to be swept up by the glitter of wealth, by the promise of a better life, and ignored the love and respect she had once known with Alex? She took a deep breath, feeling a sense of clarity she hadn't experienced in months. She wasn't the woman she was pretending to be. She wasn't the woman Marco had wanted her to be. And she wasn't going to let herself continue down this path. It was time to stop running from the past, time to face the truth. She needed to make things right, even if it meant stepping away from the life she had worked so hard to build. But as she turned to leave the balcony, Marco grabbed her arm, his grip tight and unforgiving. "Where do you think you're going, Lily?" His voice was low and dangerous. "You can't just walk away from me." In that moment, everything shifted. The world she had tried to build, the illusion she had wrapped herself in, all came crashing down, and she finally understood this wasn't the life she had dreamed of. Not anymore. Lily stood frozen, Marco's grip on her arm sending a jolt of fear through her. She could feel the heat of his anger radiating from his body as he yanked her closer, his eyes burning with a mix of frustration and possessiveness. The glittering lights of the gala beyond the balcony seemed distant now, as though they were a world away. The cold wind that had once brought her clarity now seemed to close in on her, suffocating her. In that moment, all she could see was Marco's face, twisted in irritation, and the emptiness of the life she had chosen over everything she once held dear. His words stung, but it was the weight of her own choices that really hurt. "You think you can just walk away, like I'm nothing." Marco's voice was sharp, his grip tightening even more, as if trying to prove something to her, and to himself. "You've got everything now. Don't forget who gave it to you." Lily's chest tightened, his words echoed, reminding her of everything she had given up for this hollow version of happiness. She had convinced herself that this was the life she wanted, that Marco was the key to all her dreams, but now she could see it for what it truly was, an illusion. She wasn't happy. She was suffocating. This wasn't love. This wasn't respect. It was control. A gilded cage with no way out, and as Marco's grip on her arm burned through her skin, it became painfully clear to her that she had to make a choice: stay and lose herself completely, or walk away and face the consequences of her decisions. But she couldn't stay here, not in this twisted version of a life that promised everything and delivered nothing. A bitter laugh bubbled up in her throat as she finally found her voice. "You don't get it, do you, Marco?" she said, her voice shaking but resolute. "This isn't the life I want. You're not the person I thought you were." Marco's eyes flickered with disbelief. "What are you talking about?" he growled. "You think you can just walk away from all of this? From me?" For a moment, Lily felt a pang of guilt. She had given so much to this life. The lavish dinners, the designer clothes, the sparkling events. She had left behind the man who truly loved her, the man who never would have treated her like this, and she had convinced herself it was for something better. But in that instant, all of it felt like a distant dream. Alex's face flashed before her eyes, his warmth, his quiet strength, the way he made her feel safe and loved without needing anything from her but her honesty and love in return. She had sacrificed him for a chance at a lifestyle she thought would bring her happiness, and now she was standing here, on the precipice of everything she'd once believed in, and it was all falling apart. With a deep breath, Lily wrenched her arm from Marco's grasp. He let go reluctantly, his face a mask of fury, but she stood her ground. She could feel the fear gnawing at her insides, but she also felt something else, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Power. Freedom. The freedom to make a choice that was her own, to reclaim control of her life before it was too late. "I'm done, Marco," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but the words were sharp, cutting through the tension in the air. "I can't keep pretending. This isn't love. This is a game to you, and I'm not going to be part of it anymore." Marco's jaw clenched, his hands balling into fists at his sides. "You think you can just leave me? You think anyone else is going to want you? You're nothing without me." For a brief moment, Lily felt a flicker of doubt, a momentary pause as she questioned her decision. Marco's words struck a nerve. Would she really be able to make it on her own? Could she survive without the security, the lifestyle, the promise of a future that Marco had offered her? But then she remembered Alex, She remembered the man who had loved her without expecting anything in return, who had believed in her, and who had never made her feel like a commodity. She remembered the life they had shared, even when it was hard. It had been real, and it had been enough. "No," she whispered, more to herself than to Marco. "I'm not nothing. I never was." With that, she turned and walked away, her heart pounding as she pushed through the crowd of people who had once seemed so important to her. She felt the weight of their gazes on her, felt Marco's burning stare on her back. But she didn't stop. She couldn't. The decision was made, and there was no turning back. As she stepped outside, the cool night air hit her like a wave, and for the first time in months, she felt something resembling relief. The streets were quiet, the world still and peaceful, and for a moment, she let herself breathe. She didn't know what would come next. She didn't know if Alex would take her back, if she could fix the mess she had made. But she knew one thing for sure. She would never again allow herself to be controlled by the false promises of wealth and status. She had to find herself again, find the woman she once was, the woman who had chosen love over riches, who had believed in something real. The journey ahead would be difficult, but as Lily stood in the cool night, with the city lights twinkling in the distance, she felt a spark of hope ignite within her. For the first time, in a long time, she was free. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to start over. The night air felt different now, colder, yet more invigorating than it had in months. Lily's heart still raced as she walked aimlessly through the streets, the hum of the city barely registering as she focused on the thrum of her own pulse. The decision to leave Marco had been one she didn't make lightly, but now that she had done it, she felt both an overwhelming sense of liberation and a haunting realization. The life she had chosen was gone, and with it, the person she had become. She wasn't sure who she was anymore, but one thing was clear. She wasn't the woman who had abandoned love for material things. That person was lost to the glittering world she had tried to live in, and the only way to reclaim herself was to find the courage to face the fallout. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, snapping her out of her thoughts. She hesitated before looking down at the screen, almost afraid of what might be waiting for her. It was a message from Alex. "Are you okay?" The simplicity of it hit her harder than any of Marco's angry outbursts. She had hurt him so deeply, and now, after everything, after all the hurt she had caused herself, she was asking herself if it was too late to repair the damage. She typed a quick reply. "I made a mistake, Alex. I need to talk." She hit send and paused, staring at the screen for a moment, as if willing him to respond, but there was no immediate reply. For the first time in a long while, she felt that painful sting of uncertainty. Would he even want to hear from her? Was there a chance to rebuild what they once had, or was she simply too late? Minutes passed. The phone stayed silent. She stood still in the middle of the street, the lights around her flickering, her breath forming little clouds in the night air. Then her phone buzzed again. Her heart skipped a beat. It was Alex. "I'm at the park. I'll wait for you." Lily couldn't move fast enough. She hurried to the park, her mind spinning with 1,000 thoughts. What could she possibly say to him after everything? How could she explain the choices she'd made, the pain she had caused? As she approached the park, she saw him sitting on the old bench they used to frequent, his posture stiff, his face unreadable. But she could still see it. Beneath the guarded exterior, the same warmth she had once known, the same love that had never truly disappeared, even though she had abandoned it. Lily took a deep breath, her feet moving on their own as she approached him. Alex looked up as she neared, his eyes searching her face, as if trying to understand what had brought her here after so long. She sat beside him on the bench, her hands trembling slightly in her lap. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was thick, loaded with years of unspoken words, hurt and regret. Finally, Alex spoke, his voice soft but laced with pain. "You left. Lily. You left without a word, without even a goodbye. You never gave me a chance to understand what happened, to fix it. Lily's throat tightened as tears welled up in her eyes. I was selfish, she whispered. I thought that money and status would make me happy. I thought I needed those things, that I needed to leave you behind to have them. But I was wrong. So wrong. Alex didn't say anything right away. He just looked at her, his expression a mixture of disbelief and sadness. Then, quietly, he asked, "Why now? Why come back?" Lily wiped her tears and let out a shaky breath. I lost myself. Alex, I got caught up in a world that wasn't real, and I hurt you in the process. But I can't go back. I can't fix what I did. But I need you to know how sorry I am. I need you to know that leaving you was the biggest mistake of my life. I've been trying to find a way to make sense of everything. But it's only when I walked away from that life, when I walked away from Marco, that I realized what I had with you was real. And I threw it all away. Alex's eyes softened, but the hurt was still there. You know, when you left, I thought maybe it was just a phase, that you'd come to your senses and return. I wanted to believe that, but when I didn't hear from you for so long, I started to wonder if you ever really cared about me, if you ever really loved me. Lily felt the weight of his words like a heavy stone pressing on her chest. She had never meant to cause him so much pain, but the damage was done, and it was clear that it wasn't something that could be easily fixed with apologies. She reached out, her hand trembling as she placed it gently on his. I do care. I always have. And I love you, Alex. I never stopped. I was just too blind to see it. For a long moment, they both sat in silence, the cool breeze rustling the leaves around them. The park was empty, save for the two of them, and it felt like the world had narrowed down to this one moment. Lily wasn't sure what would come next, if anything could be repaired, but she knew one thing. This conversation, this moment, was the beginning of something. Whether it was the beginning of healing or closure, she didn't know. But she had come back, not to fix the past, but to make peace with it, and with herself. Alex looked at her, his expression still guarded but softened by the vulnerability in her words. I don't know if I can just pick up where we left off, Lily, but I'm willing to try. We both have a lot of healing to do. Lily nodded, a wave of relief washing over her. It wasn't a promise of a perfect future, but it was something. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was on the right path. The weight of the choices she had made, the mistakes she had lived with, wasn't gone, but she could face them now. And for the first time, she wasn't afraid of what the future held. The days following that conversation with Alex were a whirlwind of emotions. Lily felt as if she were waking up from a long, exhausting dream. She had spent so much of her life chasing after an illusion, thinking that wealth and status would fill a void she had never fully understood. But now, with Alex's quiet forgiveness and the chance to rebuild the bridge she had burned, she could feel the weight lifting off her shoulders. The tension in her chest began to ease, though there was still a long way to go. They had taken the first step, but both of them knew that the road to healing would be neither quick nor easy. Lily spent the next few weeks reflecting on the past, on the decisions she had made, on the people she had hurt, especially Alex. It was like peeling back layers of her own identity, each revelation coming with a mix of shame, relief, and resolve. She hadn't just lost Alex, she had lost herself. The woman who had once valued honesty, love, and simple joys had been swallowed by a desire for something more. In her quest for what she thought was better, she had become someone she barely recognized. But now, as she started to repair the relationship with Alex, she also began to rebuild the woman she had lost. She wasn't the same person she had been before, and she wasn't sure she ever could be. But she was learning to be someone new, someone who valued integrity over image, connection over wealth. One afternoon, as the two of them sat on a park bench, Alex turned to her, his face serious but kind. I know it hasn't been easy for you, Lily, but I need you to know something. He paused, his fingers tightening around hers. You didn't just hurt me when you left. You hurt yourself. You've been running from who you really are for so long. It's time to stop running." Lily's heart skipped a beat at his words. He was right. For so long, she had tried to escape the truth, hiding behind the mask of the life she had created with Marco. But in the process, she had buried the real Lily, the one who cared more about love than luxury, who valued the small moments over grand gestures. And now, as Alex spoke, she realized that coming back to him wasn't just about asking for forgiveness. It was about finding her way back to herself. "I know," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I've spent too long trying to be someone I'm not. I thought I needed all of this." She gestured vaguely around them, the world that once seemed so vital. "But I was wrong. All I've ever really wanted is this. With you." Alex smiled, though there was a sadness in his eyes. "We'll figure it out, Lily. But you have to do the work." "We both do." She nodded, the weight of his words sinking in. She couldn't expect things to go back to the way they were before. The past had already been written, and it wasn't something they could rewrite. But they could build something new. They could learn from their mistakes, grow from them, and in time, maybe even become stronger because of them. It wasn't going to be easy. Trust, once broken, took time to rebuild, but they both had a foundation to start with. They had love. And that, for the first time in a long time, was enough. As the weeks passed, Lily began the process of reconciling with the parts of herself that she had abandoned. She reached out to her family, people she had distanced herself from in her quest for a different life, and tried to repair those relationships as well. Her mother, who had once warned her about the dangers of chasing after wealth, greeted her with open arms when Lily admitted the truth about what had happened. The forgiveness she found there was a balm for her wounded soul. It wasn't easy for Alex to fully trust her again, and he had every right to be cautious. But slowly they'd rebuilt their connection. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. During this time, Marco continued to live his life in the circles that Lily had once inhabited, but he never came looking for her. The world she had left behind seemed so distant now, a life she no longer cared about. The empty glamour she had once craved no longer held the same allure. Lily didn't feel the need to prove anything to anyone anymore. She wasn't trying to fit into a mold or impress anyone with her life. She was simply living it, learning from her mistakes, being honest with herself, and accepting the consequences of her choices. And then, one day, she received a call. It was from Marco. His voice was cold, but there was an unmistakable edge of frustration in it. "You think you can just walk away, Lily. You think you can leave everything behind and expect no consequences." He sounded bitter, as though the power he had over her had vanished. "You can't just pretend like this never happened." Lily took a deep breath, her heart calm despite the tension in his voice. "Marco, I didn't walk away to punish you. I walked away because I needed to find myself. I can't be the person you want me to be. I can't keep pretending that this life is everything. I'm sorry for how things ended, but I'm not coming back to it. And I'm not coming back to you." There was silence on the other end of the line, the words hanging in the air. After a long pause, Marco's voice cracked, just for a moment. "You'll regret this, Lily. You'll see." But Lily didn't respond. She didn't need to. She had already made her peace with her past, and she knew now that her future wasn't bound by the chains of what she had left behind. She had the strength to walk away, and for the first time in a long time, she knew she was finally free. As the phone call ended, she felt the weight of her decisions fall off her shoulders, the last vestiges of her old life slipping away. Looking out over the horizon, Lily saw the world for what it was, a place full of imperfections, but also full of second chances. The road ahead was uncertain, but she was no longer afraid. With Alex by her side, and with the lessons she had learned, Lily finally understood what it meant to live a life that was truly her own. And that was enough. "I'm here," she said softly, "and I'm willing to do whatever it takes." Lily's journey to reclaim her life had only just begun, but already she felt the steady pulse of change coursing through her veins. The time she spent reflecting on her past, the emotional healing she had undergone, had slowly begun to reshape who she was. No longer driven by the pursuit of external validation or the glittering allure of wealth, she was starting to embrace a simpler, more authentic version of herself. It wasn't always easy. There were moments when the world seemed to pull her back, tempting her with old habits and false promises. The people she once considered her friends, those who had congratulated her on her new life with Marco, now looked at her differently. They didn't understand why she had walked away from it all. To them, she had given up the good life, the life that most people only dreamed of. But Lily no longer cared about their approval. She focused instead on the quiet moments, the genuine connections she was building with the people who mattered most. The reconciliation with her family, especially her mother, had been a balm to her soul. Her mother, once disappointed in her choices, now saw the woman Lily was becoming, a woman who was not afraid to own her mistakes and grow from them. For the first time in years, their conversations were filled with laughter, not tension. It felt like coming home. But the most profound change was in her relationship with Alex. Their bond, fragile at first, began to deepen as they navigated the complexities of their shared past. They spent more time together, rediscovering the small things that had drawn them to each other in the first place. Quiet evenings cooking together, long walks in the park, and spontaneous conversations that stretched into the night. There were moments of awkwardness, of course. Trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild, but they were patient with each other. Lily knew she couldn't expect things to go back to the way they were before. There was no perfect ending, no magical resolution that would undo the hurt they had caused each other. But there was something better, a chance to move forward, to create new memories, and to support each other in ways they hadn't before. One evening, as they sat on the couch together, Alex turned to her, a thoughtful expression on his face. "You know, I never thought we'd get here," he said softly, taking her hand in his. "But I'm glad we did." Lily smiled, a warmth spreading through her chest. "Me too," she replied. "I never thought I'd get here either. I thought I had to be something I wasn't. But now I know that I don't need all of that to be happy. All I need is you, and the life we're building together." It wasn't the life she had once imagined, filled with designer clothes and extravagant parties. It wasn't the life she had thought would make her feel validated, but it was real, and it was enough. As the weeks turned into months, Lily continued to let go of the past. She began volunteering at a local shelter, offering her time to help others who were struggling to make ends meet. It was there, in the quiet corners of the community, that she found herself again, helping those in need, sharing her story, and realizing that true wealth was measured not in bank accounts or material possessions, but in the connections we build with others. One day, while working at the shelter, Lily received a call from an unexpected source. It was Marco. The arrogance in his voice was still unmistakable, but there was something different about his tone this time, more frustration than entitlement. "You know, Lily," he began, "I never thought you'd actually leave. I thought I could control this. But now you've gone off and made a life for yourself. And I can't stand it." Lily's heart didn't race like it used to. Instead, there was a calmness in her response that surprised even her. "I've made the life I wanted, Marco. A real one. Not the one you sold me. And that's something I'm proud of." There was silence on the other end of the line, a pause that felt heavy with unsaid words. Marco finally spoke, his voice softer now, but still tinged with bitterness. "I guess I misjudged you, Lily. I thought you were weak, but maybe you've finally figured it out." Lily didn't respond, but there was a part of her that felt something she hadn't expected: relief. Marco had been a chapter in her life, but he no longer had the power to define her. The hold he had once had over her, the illusion of control he had wielded, was gone. She had let go of that life, and now she was free. In the months that followed, Lily and Alex continued to grow together. Their relationship deepened as they faced challenges, celebrated small victories, and made plans for a future that wasn't about grandeur but about meaning. Lily learned that love, true love, wasn't about perfection or external validation. It was about choosing each other, even when things were difficult, and growing together, even when it was hard. Lily's life was not the one she had once imagined, but it was better. It was real, grounded in love, humility, and self-awareness. She had learned to embrace the journey, the mistakes, the lessons, and the growth, knowing that it had all led her to this place. With Alex by her side and a renewed sense of purpose, Lily understood that happiness didn't come from what you had, but from who you were with and how deeply you were willing to live with authenticity. In the end, it was enough to simply be herself, and for the first time in a long time, that felt like everything.